And here's looking at each one of our lines in terms of just total ridership. And the downtown waterfront shuttle, and that's combined State Street and waterfront, is shown in red, just so you can kind of see where it falls. It's up towards the highest of our riders and total riders. And another system-wide slide. This one shows riders per revenue hour, so that's sort of a more normalized measure. The downtown waterfront shuttle isn't at the top of the line, but it's still doing quite well, carrying nearly 30 passengers per hour. And that's actually less than we've had in previous years, which I'll get into a little bit more later. You may recall we increased the fare for the service at the beginning of that fiscal year from 25 cents for all riders to 50 cents with a 25-cent fare for senior citizens and persons with disabilities. And that did result in a fairly substantial decrease in ridership, but still the route does quite well. So with that, we'll move into talking about the shuttle. About almost 424,000 riders in that fiscal year, a pretty substantial ridership. You all familiar with the route, I suppose, but just in case, there's the State Street portion in blue, runs from the Dolphin Fountain up to Victoria, and the waterfront shuttle runs from the harbor to the zoo in red on that map. They are separate shuttles for the most part, except in the evenings, but they do connect. They meet basically at State and Cabrillo, and there's free transfers between the two services. Here's a little bit about the schedule. In the summer, we run a little more frequently on State Street every 10 minutes. The next slide will show you in the winters every 15 minutes. And on the waterfront, we run every 15 minutes in the summer compared to every 30 minutes the rest of the year. And then also in the summer, there's late night service on State Street and to the zoo, but not to the harbor, till 9 o'clock, from 6 to 9. Now, we may be looking at revising that service in the future, and working with the city on this. Maybe we'll include late night service to the harbor as well as to the zoo, which would make the waterfront service a little less frequent, but would provide that service to the harbor. So as I said, the fall schedule, well, it's fall, winter, and spring, really, is less frequent on State Street and on the waterfront both. And it doesn't have the late night service.
What's your definition of summer?
It's Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Okay.
And finally, I believe my last slide actually is the just some more detailed data on the downtown waterfront shuttle in that fiscal year. So as I said, about 424,000 passengers, 15,400 revenue hours. Total operating cost. This is not including depreciation, but it's our full operating cost. It comes to $1,750,000. City subsidy, fare buy down subsidy, amounts to somewhat over $1 million plus $165,000 in fare revenue. So the service is quite heavily subsidized by the city, and it's a great partnership between us and the city. 27.6 passengers per revenue hour, and a little over $4 estimated operating cost per passenger. Again, that number went up from the previous year because there were fewer passengers and roughly the same cost. So you're just spreading that cost over fewer passengers. Again, the passengers went down because we did increase the fare, and it led to a fairly substantial decrease. I'll talk a little bit about that if you'd like. So in fiscal year 13, compared to the previous fiscal year before the fare increase, we saw a decrease of about 117,000 passengers, but an increase in fare revenue of about 46,000, which is the relationship you expect, that you're going to lose some passengers but increase your fare revenue. But the passengers did increase at a greater amount than I had expected, based on using a traditional, typical kind of a transit fare elasticity. The ridership was greater than we forecasted. But as I said, it still did result in increased fare revenue, just not as much of an increase as we had hoped. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Yeah, Mr. Coppin-Gray.
I noticed on the October and November recap that you gave us that it looks like the gap is narrowing as far as passengers go, as far as since that fare increase happened. I mean, I noticed the percentage was -3 for October and went to -2 ridership variance from the year before. So does it look like, it's starting to get back to what it was before?
That's an astute observation. And we did actually see in the beginning of this new fiscal year, again, now we're talking about the period from July 1st on, we were still seeing a decrease over even the previous year after the fare increase had happened, which was not a great decrease, but somewhat of a decrease. And as you point out, in October and November, that decrease lessened. And actually, I'm happy to report in the December report, which you haven't received yet, but you will, we actually had an increase in ridership over the previous December, even though there was one fewer weekday in December 2013 than there was in the previous year. So we were real happy to see that. So, 1 month isn't a trend, but at least it is a good sign that the ridership may, we're hoping will begin to rebound.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Ms. Bosch.
Wanted to add on to that another reason for the improved performance this fall was that we had 8 cruise ships in
That's a
town
good
this
point.
fall versus only 2 the previous fall. So that definitely boosts our numbers. We see about twice as many passengers on a weekday shuttle when the cruise
It's
ships are
on.
in town.
No. Do I have to? No.
Cruise ships, yes. And is there a projection? I know there's going to be more cruise ships this year than there have been before, I believe. How does that? I remember there was talk of there were kind of boosters brought in at some points. Is that still happening? Does that affect this, or how does it?
We do, at least for most, if not all, of the cruise ships, and Cynthia actually knows much more about this than I do. We do add shuttles on those cruise ship days, and they fill up.
And they pay full freight, or the cruise ship company pays?
Defer to Cynthia on that one.
The passengers on those shuttles, and we put out 4 extra shuttles for every cruise ship, plus a supervisor to keep them all moving and on time. The passengers pay the regular fare. A lot of them are seniors, so a lot of them pay 25 cents versus 50 cents. And then it works the same way as far as the city subsidy goes on those shuttles, backfilling the operating expense.
Okay. Cool. Other questions? No? All right.
All right. Well,
Thank you
you
so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Number 5 is a Westside bike lane issue. Mr. Bailey is going to come talk to us.
As Mr. Bailey's working his way up, I just want to remind the committee, this is before the committee summer of 2012 with a request for your input and support for the removal of the bike lanes that we're going to be talking about. At that meeting, the committee said, hold off, take the next year to work with the school to see if they can increase the bicycling of the students to the school. We charged that with Coast, the Bicycle Coalition, to see if they can do that. So we're a little bit late coming back to committee. Sarah was gone for a while, and so she's back. Derek is here now to talk about the results of the last year and a half. And he'll share with the committee the counts that he's done with the bike lane and a recommendation moving forward.
Thank you.
Good evening. Before I start, I'd just like to take this opportunity to introduce a new staff member in the traffic engineering group. Extremely excited. Badad Garagolsley joined us just starting this week, and so he's the 4th member of our traffic engineering group. He's going to help us initially complete a lot of studies that we have in the queue, operational things that we've been wanting to look at, but then he's going to be turning his focus and helping us with the asset management of our traffic signal system. So But Odd,
Welcome.
very glad he's here. And Browning, thank you for the introduction to this topic. We've been looking at this for about 2 years now, and we were at the TCC in the summer of 2012 is when you last saw this. So just a really quick recap, bike lanes on the west side, they were installed sometime during the 1970s. We don't have an exact date. They wind their way through the west side neighborhood going towards Lacoumbra Junior High and during the AM peak, and away from Lacoumbra Junior High during the PM peak. So operationally what it means is during the AM peak there's a parking prohibition on the side of the road that kind of works its way towards Lacoumbra Junior High, and then on the opposite side of the road during the afternoon going away from the school. The reason we started looking at this is because we were getting complaints from residents about parking conditions. You know, they, in addition to some of the street sweeping restrictions that are on the street, they felt it unreasonable that they have to move their cars sometimes twice a day for bike lanes that in their perception just weren't being very well utilized. So we looked at that and we found that indeed they weren't being very well utilized. So July 2012, we came to the TCC and talked to you about it. The recommendation we got from you was to repaint the bike lane striping and reanalyze after 1 year. So that's what we did. Just a refresher, the route as it winds its way through the West Side neighborhood goes generally from about Harding Elementary School kind of northward along Robbins, turns on to Mission, and then up Gillespie to Lacoumbra Junior High. This graphic shows the usage both 2 years ago, March 2012, when we did our original study, and then again in October 2013 when we restudied the various segments of the route. I'm just going to get my mouse out here. So starting down near Harding Elementary, down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, in 2012 we counted 1 school-aged bike rider and 4 non-school-aged bike riders. 2013 it was 0 and 3, so very close. Along Robbins Street, we counted 0 and 0 in 2012 and 0 and 3 in 2013. Turn the corner onto Mission, we counted 1 and 2 in 2013 and 0 and I think that says 6 this past fall. And it's worth pointing out too that of those 6, there was one fellow that was riding around the block. So technically he counts, but he was riding around the block. So he didn't appear to be going anywhere. What appears to be a source of bike riders heading towards school is coming through on Gillespie Street through Mission. Last year we counted 5 school-age kids, and we counted 5 again this year, so that hasn't changed. So this segment of the bike lanes along Gillespie Street, that last block, if you will, before you get to Lacoumbra Junior High, is better utilized than the rest of the route. This route is intended for school-aged kids to ride to school, and it's in the morning anyway. It's just this last block that seems to be utilized. In the PM peak, last year, 2012, we counted 5 school-aged kids in the morning, 4 in the afternoon. This year, 11 and 3, so it's getting better. But turn the corner onto Mission Street. Last year was 1 and 3. This year, 0 students and 4 non-students. So again, kids either dissipating into the homes as they're riding along Gillespie, or they're continuing straight through Mission Street. And as you work your way south and east on the route towards Harding Elementary School, we didn't count any students utilizing the lanes this past year. So where that leaves us is we are planning to remove the parking prohibition on most of the route, Mission Street, Robbins, and Valerio. From our perspective, we can't justify continuing to inconvenience the residents if the bike lanes just aren't being used as intended. This last block on Gillespie Street between Mission and Portezuelo, it's being better utilized, and it's a transit route, and it's a narrower street than the rest of the streets in the area. We feel it's appropriate to leave the parking prohibition there. It just gives more room to maneuver. Even parents pick up and drop off. Everything. It just benefits from having some extra space during pickup and drop off times at the school. So next steps. Probably in the next few weeks, city crews will be removing the parking prohibition restriction signs on Mission, Robbins, and Valerio. And like I mentioned, the parking restriction will remain in place on Gillespie due to the narrow width, more student usage, and presence of transit vehicles. As Browning mentioned, we did wait a year before we redid this. We were of the hope that more students would take advantage of the route, but that just wasn't coming to fruition. Just in general, we really like to see students walking, biking to school, exercise, all that good stuff, but it decreases congestion around the schools, and parents dropping off their children as well as school buses. There's a lot of people going to the same place at the same time, and the streets that are typically around our schools in the city, they're not arterials, they're neighborhood streets, so they're not made for big influxes of traffic. So it is disappointing to us that this isn't being better used. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Folks have questions?
Madam Chair?
Yeah, Mr. France?
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. I wonder if, in your all's looking into this, did you ever find why the circuitous route that was chosen for the temporary parking restrictions was chosen, or does that remain a mystery of the past?
Mr. France, that's a mystery. All we know is they went in sometime in the 1970s, and we don't know why exactly or why that particular route was chosen. So.
Need a historian here.
Yeah, a traffic historian. I would love to pick somebody's brain.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Kaufman-Gray.
Not really a question, but I just want to thank the city for giving the opportunity to try to get this to work, because I know when we first saw this a year and that summer, there was no bike lanes at all, even though they had those parking restrictions, and people we thought, well, maybe if we put the striping in, maybe that would help, people realize, oh, we can, be safe to ride our bike. But obviously that's not the case. And, I feel for the residents that have had to put up with moving their cars all this time when probably look out and they don't see anybody using that, the bike lanes. But at least we gave it a shot, and, it obviously isn't needed in that area. And, the city recommendation, or what you're going to be doing, I think is the proper thing to do, because there's just not a need for this right here.
Thank you.
Possibly, when we work in the bicycle master plan down the road, we can look at the whole Westside area, and maybe there might be need for a bike lane somewhere else in that area for students on bikes.
Yeah, it certainly appears as though there's a demand for cycling facilities on the west side, but what dots to connect, we're going to be hopefully working through that in the bike master plan.
Right. Yeah, I really appreciate the staff taking time to see how it is, to study it, to know, and not just go off of, anecdotal, angry people, who didn't want to move their cars. I'm glad we're leaving it on Gillespie. That seems like, as the approach is closer, it makes a lot of sense. And also, as we look at the bicycle master plan, hopefully, we'll be able to piece things together in a more holistic way. Because I know when it came before us before, we were kind of, we kind of chafed at the idea of okay, so we're removing bike lanes, but we haven't even looked at the whole city's plan, and now we're going to, which is really exciting. So, so I appreciate that doing your due diligence to check it out. And let it be known, city residents, that we're removing parking restrictions somewhere. We're doing nice things for cars, so chalk one up for the car here. We're removing bike lanes. Imagine that. Yeah, so I guess there's not really anything for us to do because this is happening. So are there any more questions? No? All right. So do we need to just receive the report, basically?
You could either report or you could take a motion to support staff's process, but
Okay.
it's really at the pleasure of the committee.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, can we make comments as well?
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah. Comments, questions? Yeah, there's no public comment, obviously, so.
If I could make a comment,
Yeah.
thank you. So thank you, Mr. Bailey. I support this. I'd like to say, when we were presented this about a year and a half ago, then I abstained I recused myself entirely because the Bike Coalition had taken a stance on the issue. It was a challenging concept because the west side, west of 101 to the Mesa, has basically no safe bike route. I think there's some sharrows along San Andreas, which is a very dangerous road, and aside from that, there's not really a good route. I'd like to share, I was really happy to see the city posted online the 1973, or maybe it was finalized in 78, bike master plan. So the first bike master plan of the city. And there's some really interesting graphs and such in there. They did some extensive counts and actually weighted. It's one of those maps where the road gets broader as there's more count. And looking through the west side, at that time, Chino was kind of one of the major routes. Also looking through, one of the main differences that you can notice between that era in the 70s and now is that whereas bicycling is actually, bicycle rates compared to bicycle coalition counts, even though none of them are exactly the same count and exactly the same time of day, when you actually apply the same kind of math, they weight to be equal in some areas and higher in some areas today than they were in the 70s, even though there was a bike boom in the 70s. And it's often said by folks like Cars Are Basic that the 70s was when bicycling was at its highest and it'll never be at that height. If you look at the data from that bike plan, you can actually make a fair comparison. You have to do a little math to compare today's counts to counts back then. But what's interesting is that areas by the schools were a lot higher then and are a lot less now. And we have more bicyclists who are non-school age commuters. So in other words, a lot of the stuff that was done in the 70s served schools specifically. And unfortunately, it's quite sad, that need is no longer as prevalent as it was at that time. And not that necessarily these routes were all that well chosen, because it's really interesting that they were chosen along that when the routes don't actually even show up as heavily used on that 1970s Bikeway Master Plan map. So I guess I'd just like to comment that, back 30 years ago, the city heavily utilized temporary bike lanes, primarily for school purposes. And I don't know if that was the wisest choice, and that's a legacy that we have. And this is an example of something that didn't work, and the city even retried to see if it could work, and it doesn't. And that's great, because that's exactly the responsiveness that citizens expect of their city staff and city committees. I would like to comment that as the bike master plan comes up, the west side, west of 101, between Modoc hitting Mission, so between Mission and basically the beach or shoreline and Montecito Street, has no safe route. But there's a strong need, especially for the California Pacific Coast route, down Modoc. Once Modoc hits Mission, there's a need for folks, especially like city college students who are attempting to find their way to the city college, who might want to stay west of 101. There's a need to make that connection. And the needs are beyond the schools. And while this need no longer adequately suits La Cumbra, it's definitely does not show that there's a lack of need overall for the West Side. And in fact, I hope that with the loss of this lane, we might think critically during the bike master planning process as to what would be the best routes to connect from Mission, hopefully all the way down to Rancheria and Montecito, where Montecito and splits from Cliff. So thank you so much.
Other comments? Yeah, that's one. Turn on the mic.
I have a question about order of the agenda, and I don't see any place to say it, so I'm just going to ask right now what would be the best thing. But there was, in the minutes of the 23rd, there was a note that said about the bike corral on Figueroa, that was going to the committee in the Downtown Parking Committee in November. And where would it be appropriate to ask what the results were of that? Is that something for the next agenda, or can we talk about it
Maybe
tonight?
at the end of the meeting, if we can finish up with this.
Yeah, we really can't discuss that. I can give you an update on the announcements, but we can't have a conversation about it because it's not agendized. But we certainly can put on a future agenda if the committee wants to have a conversation. In fact, it'd probably be a good idea because of some of the comments or direction from the parking committee does directly impact this committee.
Okay, so something for a future agenda, if that's possible.
Okay.
Cool, thanks. So on this
Thank
item
you.
for the West Side Bike Lane, any questions, comments? Okay. Is there a motion to receive this report and support staff's recommendation?
I'll move to receive the report and accept the staff recommendations to remove the bike lanes on Robbins and Mission and retain the bike lane on
And Valerio.
Gillespie. Right?
Valerio, too.
Valerio. I'm Valerio, too.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstention.
Okay, one abstention from Ms. Horn. All right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. And I just wanted to acknowledge that our Planning Commission liaison, Deborah Schwartz, is here. Catherine Rio sends her regrets. She had another event, and want to acknowledge our newest council member, Greg Hart, is in the audience. So thanks for coming.
Madam Chair, I apologize for being late. The Planning Commission just permitted today at 6 o'clock, so I...
Long day at the Planning Commission. Really, it's fine. For those of you at home, you can't see that everyone is nestled in a corner here.
And I neglected to tell the committee that our acting Public Works Director, Rebecca Bjork, is in attendance this evening as well.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Great. So the final thing to do is an election of a chair and vice chair. It's been a year. Feels like 3 months, but here we are in 2014. Yeah. So is there a nomination for chair?
I'd like to nominate Keith Kaufman-Gray for this.
All right. Nomination of Keith Kaufman-Gray for chair. Second. All right. Any other nominations for chair? All right. Perfect. And all those in favor of electing Mr. Kaufman-Gray as chair, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome. Yay. We'll applaud for you. And for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Cynthia
All right.
for vice chair. DeBosch.
Perfect. Nominating Cynthia. Is there a second?
Second that.
All right. Fantastic. Do you accept? Okay. All right. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations. We'll applaud for vice chair too. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure over the past 2 years serving as chair, and look forward to staying on the committee. And I appreciate working with staff and meeting with Browning ahead of the meetings, go over the agenda and everything, and really appreciate it. So thanks for making it a pretty smooth committee to run. My first meeting as chair was the hardest one because there was a room full of people, and it got much easier. So I appreciate that. So I guess we can adjourn the meeting. Is a motion to adjourn, or are there any announcements? Any other announcements?
Let me just tell the committee that the bike corral in Canterbury is something that staff is still working on. We will bring it before this committee to give you a formal update. We're still in the process of finalizing those plans. We'll most likely be going to the City Council Sustainability Committee to get their input as well. But we did go to the Downtown Parking Committee. They did support it, but it wasn't unanimous. There was one member who had issues about it, and I can get in more detail of that when we bring it before this committee. But just to let you know, it's still working its way through the process, and after we go to the Council Sustainability Committee, then we'll be going to the HLC for the review. So not sure what meeting will come in February or March on that. Most likely March. I'd like to have more than just one item. Hopefully we can have a little longer than a 35-minute meeting the next time around. But
Okay.
Just like to thank you, Hillary, for your terrific job. It's been great.
Thank you.
Oh, Browning, do you want to mention about the meeting with City Council on Monday, the working committee for East Side?
yeah, on Monday afternoon at 5 p.m. at City Hall in the City Council chambers, the City Council will be considering the use of one-time only capital money. It's general fund money. It's $4.3 million, just rounding it off. So there is a list of projects that have been identified by staff from various departments, and included in there are 3 projects from the East Side Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan that we have put together. So City Council will be making hopefully a decision on Monday as to how those monies will be used for various capital projects.
Great. All right. Motion to adjourn? No? You want to stay forever and
I
ever?
move we
Okay.
adjourn.
All right. Second. All right, we're adjourned.